Thanks, Carl. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Leah Henrickson, lecturer in digital media and cultures at the University of Queensland. Dr. Henrickson is an international recognized scholar whose work explores how we understand computer-generated text, AI, and digital media environment. She is the author of Reading Computer-Generated Text, along with numerous peer-reviewed publications examining text generation system and their cultural implication. Her newest book, Digital Storytelling: An Introduction, reflects her broader research interest in how digital storytelling can support critical self-reflection, pedagogy, community engagement, and even commercial innovation. She's particularly enthusiastic about collaboration involving digital methods and media, hermeneutics, communication histories, and unconventional forms of text production and dissemination. Today, Leah will present her talk, Embracing Uncertainty, Rethinking Digital Storytelling and Authentic Learning. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Leah Henrickson.
Thank you so much, Karen. I am going to talk for about 30 minutes today, but I'm open to keeping the conversation going. So I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. If anyone is connected there, I'm happy to kind of keep talking about anything that might be confusing or upon which you might like some further elaboration. I'm also not going to be monitoring the chat throughout this talk. So if something horrible happens, if someone could just use the audio to let me know, and then I'll direct myself there because I am using a full screen and on a very tiny laptop in this hotel room. I won't be able to kind of nicely monitor the chat. So, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Karen. I was just going to say, Karen and I'm proud. We'll keep an eye on that for you.
Cool. Thank you so much. All right. Let's get started. So I was asked to talk today about embracing uncertainty, rethinking digital storytelling and authentic learning. Karen very kindly reached out and was like, we know you've published this article. Can you give us a talk about it? Yes, I can. For those of you who want the slides today as well, they are available at this link, tinyurl.com/sprig-dst. This link will also be on the final slide. So if you miss it this time and you're like, actually, I do want the slides, no worries. It will be coming up at the end. And I believe that this talk is being recorded for your future reference as well. So what is the paper that Karen asked me to talk about? This one, You Are an Old Man in a Cave, The Authenticity of Vagueness. This was published earlier this year in Communication Teacher. And it is a paper that talks about a particular assessment that I give to my students in my master's level digital storytelling class. It is the same assessment I also gave to my second year digital storytelling class when I was at the University of Leeds a couple of years ago. I've been running this assignment for a long, long time. And I finally decided to write it up because it confuses a lot of people. So this assignment, and you'll see it on the next slide, this assignment is intentionally vague. It's intentionally incredibly open, and it's intentionally confusing for students. And I'll talk about why I do it that way throughout this presentation. The reason that this paper is called You Are an Old Man in a Cave is because it begins with this reflection on the Legend of Zelda. So the popular 1986 video game, The Legend of Zelda, begins in a cave. There's an old man standing between two flames, and he's standing kind of behind a sword. And you can see this on the right-hand side. Those of you who've played Zelda, you're like, I know exactly what you're talking about. The flames, and the sword are all that's in the room when the protagonist, Link, who you can see at the bottom here in the green, enters. It's dangerous to go alone. Take this, the old man insists, but he gives no further explanation. When the player moves Link forward, Link picks up the sword and triumphantly raises it above his head, and then the old man just disappears. So once you get the sword, the old man is no longer relevant. Link leaves the room and then goes on his adventure, but every once in a while he goes into another cave, and this old man, we're not sure if it's the same old man or a different old man. Who cares? Apparently old men are all the same. They are in this room. They give Link something with this kind of vague instruction, and then they disappear. They're no longer relevant to the game. So this is the assessment that I talk about in that paper, and this is it in its entirety. The proposed assessment is called Negotiating Uncertainty Through and About Digital Storytelling. Produce a digital story in a format of your choosing. The experience of the story must last at least 2 minutes. And it should contain at least 2 of these elements: text, graphics, animation, video, sound, narration, and or interactive functionality. Accompany your story with an exegesis of no more than 150 words. That is all the students are given. They are given a rubric because I need to give them a rubric as part of my job. But The rubric is also intentionally vague. You can see that each section of this assessment also has footnotes, so it has additional information about it. But when you go to the footnotes, which I've just pasted here in the bottom left corner, you'll see that basically all of them just say, or don't, do what you want, like make it work for you. And the reason I do this is why I'm here for the rest of this talk. I'm going to be elaborating on why I kind of keep it really, really open, not just for the students, but also for the people who are implementing the assessment, and why I think uncertainty is important in all of those areas. So I'll start by kind of getting some buzzwords in the university space addressed. And what I'm doing in this paper is I'm going to quote quite liberally from the paper that I've published. And the reason I do that is just to draw your attention to what I've already said, so that if you need it for any reason, if you need this to support your own work, you know what's in there. And I don't need to repeat myself or reinvent the wheel. I've already written this. These are my thoughts. So in the paper I write, recently, universities have seen a wave of interest in quote unquote authentic assessments, activities that require students to demonstrate knowledge and skills related to future employment opportunities. These future employment opportunities are frequently called, quote, real world contexts, suggesting that a classroom is somehow a less real, more inauthentic space than an office. So you can see in this passage that I'm pretty skeptical of the notion of authentic and real world. I think we all live in all these artificial spaces. I'm not sure how a classroom is any less authentic than any other space. But later in the paper, I write that technologies, problem-solving techniques, and procedures change, or maybe they're not changing and need to change. We must prepare our students for the futures they will be imagining and actualizing, not the presents and soon-to-be pasts that we are currently occupying. But this is not the goal of many authentic assessments, which tend to focus on evaluating final outputs rather than processes of thought and creation. I'm really interested in these assessments on not so much the final output, because the final output, for a lot of what I do, at least in media studies, we might teach them particular tools or we might teach them particular ways of doing things, but the field moves so quickly that those ways of doing things or those tools are often rendered irrelevant within a year or obsolete within a year. I'm not actually that interested in teaching my students how to use the ins and outs of Canva or how to do prompt engineering, exactly, because all of those things are going to change as things develop. What is more important to me is that students understand the processes of creation, the processes of critical and creative thought, and those are transferable across any kind of tool or any kind of situation. So that's really what I'm trying to get them to do with this assignment. Not so much think about the final output, but think about how you reach the final output. And I think that's the most authentic thing. Nothing is more authentic than uncertainty. So nothing is more authentic than uncertainty. And digital storytelling, I believe, provides one means of negotiating that uncertainty while encouraging students to co-create knowledge through communication. It is a sword that we can give our students before they leave us and we disappear. So just harking back to that Legend of Zelda idea that I opened the paper with. So nothing is more authentic than uncertainty. The thing that sparked this kind of thinking in myself, and I want to go back to just where my thinking developed, because again, I'm all about process. I'm all about kind of thinking about how we reach the conclusions, more the conclusions themselves. This all started because I was reading a popular science book by Carlo Rovelli. Carlo Rovelli is a theoretical physicist. He's written quite a few books, and they're all incredibly readable and relevant and just amazing. So I cannot recommend them highly enough if you're looking for actually quite a good academic beach read, because I'm the person who's reading academic books on the beach. That's just who I am. I will not be shamed. And Carlo Rovelli in the book, so he's talking about entropy, and he's talking about the chaos of the universe. And this idea of chaos has really started to pervade a lot of my work. So if you read anything I've written recently, it'll all have to do with chaos. I'm pretty fixated on it. And he writes that we are stories contained within the 20 complicated centimeters behind our eyes, lines drawn by traces left by the remingling together of things in the world, and orientated towards predicting events in the future, towards the direction of increasing entropy in a rather particular corner of this immense chaotic universe. And when I read this, I had to read this a couple times, and I have included this slide on pretty much every presentation I've given in the last year and a half. I think it is just so poignant and perfect. I think this idea that we are trying to make sense of the chaos in the universe. We are trying to use storytelling to kind of bring these chaotic elements of the universe together and to make sense and calm the entropy. But as we tell stories, right, we get a sense of calmness from that entropy. But the world keeps moving. And so even though we get a periodic sense of calm, by the time we reach that calm, more and more is happening and more entropy happens. And we just kind of constantly are trying to make meaning and peace from the entropy that we're faced with. So storytelling is not just this final output. Storytelling never ends. Storytelling is a kind of verb. It's like a gerund almost, like it's constantly ongoing, right? So it's a constant process. It never finishes, right? So the story might periodically be, or it's kind of in a moment be finished, but the storytelling is ongoing. And I might make sense of someone else's story. So I might tell stories from someone else's stories. I might retell stories from my own stories. It's just this constant process of trying to make sense from and with entropy. And this is the idea that drives the latest book that Karen was talking about. This is Digital Storytelling and Introduction. It finally came out worldwide November 25th, and that includes an ebook form. So if you are interested in reading this, please either buy a copy yourself or request a copy at your local library. I would love to have more libraries carry this title. It's published by Polity, and Polity has very graciously now given me a discount code. So if you want 30% off, the code you need is DST30 at politybooks.com. And that's just in the top left corner of this slide. And again, this will come up towards the end of the presentation if you miss it the first time. So digital storytelling and introduction. In this book, I respond to the more conventional understandings of digital storytelling. So for those of you in this group, and some people are not aware of this, but a lot of us, I think, will be very familiar with this book here by Joe Lambert. It's in its 6th edition, and you can see the 6th edition here on the right-hand side. They're all basically the same book. So some of them are hard, some of the editions are harder to get than others. If you get any edition, they're all fundamentally the same thing. And Lambert, now with Brooke Hessler, proposes a particular model of digital storytelling. This is the classical digital storytelling model, what we now call classical DST. And in classical digital storytelling, there is a 3-day-ish workshop where you go through 5 steps. So you start with this lecture about digital storytelling and what it is, but then you go through this very kind of set method where you start with a story circle, you share your story with people in the room, and the room is curated. It's usually quite a small group of people all responding to a similar topic. You start by sharing your story in a circle, orally. You then move towards storyboarding. So you draw out your story and you kind of figure out what you want your story to look like and sound like. You then write a short script. You then create your story. So you might use personal videos and photos in a kind of usually a movie making software, a free movie making software like WeVideo. And Antonia Liguori did talk a little bit about this in her last talk for SPRIG. This particular method is what Antonia mostly uses with great success. And you'll narrate your story over those photos and videos. And then at the end of the workshop, you're sharing your story with everyone else. So that story circle thing comes back, but this time it's more of a digital story circle. And this method is great. I will say this method works. It's tried and tested. The subtitle for up until the 6th edition of Joe's book, Capturing Lives, Creating Community, really does speak to what this method does. It brings people together, it empowers them to share their stories, and it's an iterative process of storytelling. So again, we are focused a little bit on process here. We're focused on developing the story so it comes out to exactly as you want it to be. But the ultimate focus of this method is really the final story at the end. So it's really like you're working towards the creation of this artifact. You've created this artifact, and then you share it with everyone, and then wipe your hands. That's all done. You've shared your story, and that's it. And it is not as simple as that. I will say, like, I am being a little bit overly simplistic, but I don't think by much. The point of this method is to create an output, not to engage with current and kind of ongoing processes of storytelling. So that's what I try to do in my book. I try to say, okay, well, Lambert has this model and it's great and it works, but it's not enough. And generally, Lambert's model ends up in these short videos. And I think, that method was created in the 1990s, early 1990s, and not a lot has changed about the method, but a lot has changed about our current digital circumstances. And I'm a lecturer in digital media and cultures. I'm very aware of how those changes have kind of come about. And I wanted to make a model of digital storytelling that responded to the kind of constantly changing circumstances. So in the book, this is my definition of digital storytelling. Instead of focusing on outputs and kind of what stories the digital storytelling is, I focus on what digital storytelling does. And the definition I use is that digital storytelling produces effect and affect through intertwingularity, transformativity, interactivity and embodiment, and multimodality. I use intentionally vague terms because I'm all about the intentional vagueness and the uncertainty. I use intentionally vague terms to try to get people to think about the processes of digital storytelling rather than the products. Again, I'm all about process more than product. So very basically, I'm not going to go through all of those words in detail in this presentation because that's actually not the point of this presentation, but I will just give you a real whirlwind set of definitions so that if something kind of sparks interest in you, you can go and you can learn more in the book if you want to. And I'm happy to talk about this kind of stuff in the question period too, but I will be rushing through this section because this is not the key focus of the talk. This slide though, this is a key point. So when I talk about effect and affect, effect, I'm referring to what are you trying to say? The message you're trying to get across. What are you trying to communicate to somebody through your story? And that somebody could be a future self. So when you write in a diary, for example, the future audience for that might be you, and that's totally legitimate. But it could also be, Olivia in the present or in our kind of introductory talks earlier was talking about how she was talking to students and how those students are trying to make sense of nutrition information. So they might be trying to communicate to themselves, but also to other students, to their assessors, or to their potential future patients. So, who is the audience here and what do they need to know? What are you trying to get across? And then there's affect. So affect is the stuff that, in my view, makes storytelling. How should we feel? Why should we care? What should we do? What's the point? What are we supposed to do with the message? What are we supposed to kind of feel in response to that message? And then my definition goes through this kind of fourfold framework. Again, not the point of this talk, but very briefly, I talk about intertwingularity, that interconnectedness of human knowledge and experience. This comes from Ted Nelson, the coiner of the term hypertext. And it's the idea that we don't think linearly. So why do we try to tell stories linearly? Like my brain is constantly going in all these different directions, and your brains are constantly going in all these different directions. And all of those directions are different across different people. So how can we tell stories or encourage storytelling practices that are not necessarily linear, but that embrace the kind of intertwingledness of human knowledge, both within people and across people? We also have the concept of transformativity, which is the idea that we repurpose existing content to produce new content and or new perspectives. This is the idea of remixing content, of remaking content, of updating content. In Indigenous cultures, there's a great passage by Tracy Bunda and Louise Phillips in their book on storying, where they talk about how storying, one story gets passed across different generations. And the story is constantly transformed, but the story itself, there's this core thing, but it's repurposed for different things. Different generations need it for different things, and they change it in light of the kind of worldly changes that those people are experiencing. At the same time, it's not just about changing the story, but it's about changing perspective. So as we all know, I think the reason we're probably all here and so attracted to storytelling is because storytelling has helped us change the way we see our world and see our beliefs and our worldviews. So transformativity can also happen internally, and it can also happen transformative learning is a really hot topic right now. Interactivity and embodiment, the physical and psychological inclusion of audiences. So physically, what do you have to do to interact with the story? Are you flipping a page? Are you clicking a button? Are you moving your mouse around? Psychologically, what do you have to do? How do you have to engage your brain to make sense of what is being presented to you? And then finally, multimodality. And I use the multimodality from the New London group for those who that means something to. So this is the idea that we can bring together different ways of communicating into kind of one cohesive story. So you can mix text and image, you can add some audio, you can add some gestural or spatial elements. All these things come together to tell a story. So even though you might be reading a book, for example, and you think that's actually just a textual form, you're still looking at things. You're still hearing things around you. You are in a space, right? If I read a book on a bus, that's a very different experience than if I read a book in the privacy of my own home, or if I read a book on a screen, for example. So all of these things come together for very different experiences. And that's what I try to talk about when I talk about multimodality. So, okay, so that's what's in the book. You can read it if you want or not, do your own thing. As you can see in the footnotes on the left-hand side, I'm like, do whatever works for you. I'm not going to tell you what to do. But let's go back to this final assessment. So this is the assessment that I give them at the end of the semester in my digital storytelling class. And the reason I've just gone through the definitions I've given you in the book is because those are the definitions that we unpack throughout the course. So by the time the students are given this assessment, they will have gone through all of that definitional stuff in quite a lot of detail that I've just given you. And they will have thought really critically about these vague terms. They're still vague and they're intentionally vague, but the students would have had a very kind of good idea as to how these terms apply to their everyday lives. So again, I'm asking students to produce a digital story in a format of your choosing, and the experience has to be at least 2 minutes. Very hard not to reach that requirement. And it should contain at least 2 of these elements. So various list of elements. You will notice, right, that these elements are almost impossible not to reach. So it is really hard to have a text with no interactivity, or to have an animation without video or graphics. So these instructions, as I say in the footnotes, these instructions are actually just to give students a feeling that they are being guided through something, but actually they're pretty meaningless. And even the story with an exegesis of no more than 150 words, that came because students were like, well, we want to be able to explain ourselves, but I don't mark that exegesis. You might decide to mark it. I'm not going to mark it. It's just, again, to give students a sense of structure in this otherwise pretty unstructured assessment. How do students feel about this? So before I show you some of the results we get, and unfortunately I don't have tons of results, only because I haven't gotten students' consent to share them with you just for this purpose. But students, I've written this up in a paper for the Journal of Academic Librarianship, which was published last year. We gave a very similar assignment to digital practices students at the University of Leeds. So not exactly the same assignment, but very, very similar. And my colleagues, Ben Hall and Tim Proctor, with them, we came up with this term, constructive bewilderment. So in the assignment, we are using special collections material. I'm a book historian by training, so I have 2 degrees in book history. And I will use any excuse to kind of get students to interact with manuscript material and books and things like that. And we tried to get our students to use manuscripts from, like, local manuscripts from Leeds. And they had to digitize those manuscripts in some way and then tell the story of those manuscripts. And that was all we told them. We're like, do it. And we gave them a bunch of methods they had to use. So it wasn't, like, even in digital storytelling, the course, right? We go through a lot of different storytelling technologies and tools, and they can use whatever they want. And we gave them pretty much free rein. And in this paper, we give you some quotes from the students. We say, like, these are what the students thought. And the students kind of unanimously are like, we hated it. At the beginning, we thought this was really ridiculous. Like, we're kind of floating around. We're not given any guidance. We go to the tutorials and the tutor is there, but the tutor's not giving us answers. And we're really kind of struggling to make sense of the material. And for almost every group, right, about early or mid-semester, every group experienced a click moment where they had been kind of dwelling in all this material and they're trying to make sense of it. They're trying to dig through it. They're trying to come up with ideas. And all of a sudden, things kind of start to come together, and they start to see, actually, there's this thing in this local manuscript from 1905 or whatever it is. Like, I know that street, or, oh, that kind of point that someone's making, that makes sense to me, right? All of a sudden, like, they start to be able to put themselves into the work because they're scrambling to try to make sense of it. And they're looking for anything, and they find it. They find those points and they're able to elaborate on those points. And then once that happens, they can start to kind of communicate what that book means in a current context. So they start to retell the story of that book in current contexts. That uncertainty and us not telling them what they should be looking for, us giving them pretty much free rein, allows them to explore the book in ways that we couldn't have anticipated, but also allows them to come up with stories about that book that we definitely couldn't have anticipated. So there are some quotes throughout that paper for those of you who are interested from the students. For the digital storytelling assignment, I said I'd been running this assessment for a long time. I gave a talk about this assessment in 2021, 2022 for Wonky. Those of you who are in the UK will be familiar with Wonky, or Wonk HE. And this was in collaboration with Adobe. I was asked to talk about this assignment and again about uncertainty and play and kind of letting students play freely to reach these kinds of new understandings of material. And so in my digital storytelling class there, which looked very similar to what it looks like now at Leeds, or sorry, at UQ, the University of Queensland, I told my students, like, look, I'm going to show you a bunch of tools throughout this course. We're going to play throughout the tutorials. We're just going to have a nice time. We're going to try to explore different ways of telling stories. But the final assessment, you have all the freedom. You have all the choice. So produce a digital story in the format of your choosing. And you'll see a couple of these examples in this image here. And if you click the image, you will be brought to the video, which is why I have the video here. You'll be brought to the video and you can watch me talk about this for about 5 minutes in the video. You can see here that our students, so where I'm putting my cursor here, there are avatars who came together and role played particular characters. So every student kind of took on a different character and they met in this online space and they acted out a story themselves. Right below that, we have a black and white picture. So this student used the classical digital storytelling model. She brought her own black and white photography. But on top of that black and white photography, you can kind of see it here. She's drawn in with her iPad. She's drawn in some red lines. And the whole story was all of her black and white photos, but she had drawn in lines to emphasize particular parts of that story and to tell a story through essentially line drawings on top of her own photos. We have students who tried video making. So we have videos on top of videos, which is why you see this girl arguing here. And then below her, you see her holding her face in her hands. One of the things my students love to do, we teach meme making as storytelling. So I really believe that memes are kind of a powerful way to tell stories online now. A lot of our students use memes. So they take news articles and then they turn them into memes. So your girl roommate saying you look tasty, she's a cannibal. It was in response to a news article. A student didn't just come up with that. But when you allow Los Angeles to exist, and you see this really flamboyant looking image here. The one that I'm really proud of, and I was so glad that she allowed us to use this as an example for this talk. This example here, I had a student who had never learned how to animate. She'd never done animation before, but she was like, my coming out story, this is a story of her coming out to her grandfather. And she was like, in my head, I see this as an animation. I see this as a cartoon. So many aspects of this story were quite cartoonish and just really almost like over the top. And the only way I can tell my story is through animation. And throughout the assessment, she taught herself how to animate. She's all hand drawn, and she had animated her own hand drawings to tell the story because that's how she felt her story was best told. So in that instance, we really saw an example of a student taking her learning into her own hands and saying, this is what I've learned in class. These are the concepts I've learned. And now I'm going to try to put them into practice by also teaching myself how to animate and how to draw and tell a story that way. And so we really see through all these examples, in my view at least, we really see the students recognizing like, hey, I can use storytelling to tell my story exactly how I want it to be told. And I'm going to actually go above and beyond and teach myself how to do other things so I can put the concepts I've learned into practice. I've also written a little bit about my own efforts to tell stories, not necessarily through creation, but through psychological work. So this chapter just came out about a week or two ago, and it's in the Routledge Companion of Digital Humanities to Digital Humanities in Practice. It's a fantastic open access volume published by Constance Compton, Laura Estill, Richard Lane, and Ray Siemens. Highly, highly recommend this book. It's so great for just methods. Digital humanities methods. And I published the method on digital storytelling. And in this chapter, I talk about how I use digital storytelling to make sense of my choices to be an immigrant in the UK. And at the time, that choice wasn't making sense anymore. And I use digital storytelling and kind of going through other people's digital stories to really come to terms with how I felt about my choices to live in the UK and ultimately my choices to leave. So it's a very personal chapter that tries to get you to think about how digital storytelling, actually, the process of digital storytelling, can help you make sense of your own life, as well as kinds of concepts we see in the classroom. I'm going to end this talk with the point I make in the article that opened this talk and why I'm here today. This is the article that Karen asked me to talk about. So I'm going to end on those notes there. In the article, I conclude with the following. As they stumble through the mess and the darkness, do not tell your students everything that you know. Occasionally, stay silent. Hold space for your students to speak, working through concepts and problems for themselves. If they realize they have made mistakes, either in their thinking or as they try using new digital technologies, hang back, giving them chances to find their own solutions. At times, you may need to provide reassurance, prompts, or guidance. Do so, and then back off again. You will start to see that your students approach course content in ways that you had not anticipated. Even the laziest and most ridiculous ways may demonstrate understandings of course content alternative to your own. It's dangerous to go alone. Take this. But where are they going? Why is it dangerous? And what is this? Once your students have figured out the answers to these questions for themselves, it's time for you to disappear, or at least until they find you in another cave. Because this talk has been really just shameless self-promotion, let's keep going. If you are interested in the book, which kind of brings together a lot of the thinking that I've presented in this talk, and all the links in these slides work. So if you want to go through any of the articles that I've directed you to, you can go to the slides and click through. But if you want a copy of the book, that DST30 code will give you 30% off at politybooks.com. One of the great things about Polity is that the book is already affordable. It's one of the reasons I really like Polity as a publisher, is they publish things that people can afford to buy. But let's make it even more affordable with 30% off. So there you go. And finally, if you want to revisit these slides, they are available at tinyurl.com/sprigdst. I'd be happy to continue the conversation. If anyone has any questions or comments, I'm also happy to take them now. Thank you so much for listening to me talk about my work. I'm so excited that you're here, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what everyone else is doing.
Thank you so much, Leah, and for insightful and engaging presentation. And your work has given a lot to reflect on or to think on. And I really appreciate you sharing the time and expertise